Plain Truth, a show where we go into some of the mysteries, anomalies, and dirty underbelly of the world around us. I'm your host, Paul, and joining us this week, we have Lada Ray, who writes on, what can we say, geopolitical things with an esoteric kind of feng shui feel, and she's also an interesting novelist. Lada, are you there?
Hello, how are you?
Oh, fine. Thanks for coming. Appreciate it. And along for the ride is my friend Melody. Melody, are you there?
Yes, I am.
Okay, well, thanks for coming. Well, Lada, it's been a while since we talked, and I've been off a bit enjoying Thailand, so now I'm getting back into what I guess we call the real world. But how have you been?
Great. Busy.
Busy?
Yes.
Well, I guess I've been busy. Those beaches in Thailand are awfully... The schedule is pretty strict there. So, but anyway, thanks for joining us. And this week we're going to talk about Eurasia. So that tremendous landmass from Europe on one end, from Portugal, I guess, on one end to Vladivostok or Kamchatka on the other end. And I thought we'd start with, what can we say, the most interesting character, I guess, dealing with the whole Eurasian question would be Vladimir Putin. And recently, he kind of disappeared, sort of. Any thoughts on that?
Yes, right. It's a very interesting situation when for about 10 days, Putin was pretty much out of the limelight, which immediately sent the entire Western MSM, as well as Ukrainian media that I do follow just out of necessity, so I could write about what's really happening there, plus the liberal type of the Russian media, that liberal type that is pro-Western. They immediately announced that Putin had a stroke, was dead, or there was a Kremlin coup. Then I believe 3 or 4 pictures of tanks on Moscow streets appeared, and those 3-4 pictures were repeated everywhere from CNN to Reuters to BBC to all other media outlets out there. Later, it turned out that those tanks were actually from 4 years ago, when the Russian army was rehearsing the Victory Day parade for May 9th, about 4 years ago. Of course, no fresh pictures ever appeared in the city of 10 plus million people. Nobody managed to take any fresh pictures. So, of course, all that went away. Putin reappeared on the scene, as I wrote in my article on Futurist Trendcast, exactly on March 16th, as I predicted in that article. I got a lot of panicked readers emailing me, where is Putin? Where is it true that something happened to him? Of course, I had to write an article specifically to reassure everybody that no, nothing happened. And, people do have things to do, or perhaps to rest. And most likely, it's just... I didn't say most likely. I basically said on March 16th he would reappear, and he did. And recently I got inside intel what really was happening. After I tell you what went on, I will then tell you why it was kept so quiet. But you will probably understand from the news what really was going on and why it has to be kept quiet. So during that period, Putin was meeting with Russia's top thinkers and economists. And as a result, the complete strategy for the future has emerged. We discussed this future in many articles and also in predictions on Futurist Trendcast and my blog. And I also do that at my YouTube channel regularly. So those who are interested in my predictions, what I said since 2014 in articles and videos, please go ahead and go on my channel or on Futurist Trendcast. And also, Paul and Melody, we discussed it in our previous interviews here and there as well. So what is happening now is that the Central Bank of Russia, which a lot of people have been disappointed that they was following so closely in the a trail of the dollar of the U.S. is now poised to conduct policies that are much more consistent with the interests of Russia, and they're also more directed towards the future. But formally, the present chief of the Russian Central Bank, Elvira Nabiullina, stays on. Some were saying that there is a Kremlin coup, and in a way it is actually, except it's a very quiet coup. The reason that nobody was unseated from their high perch, from their positions, including Nabiullina. There was also talk about the economics minister. Everybody stays on. Energy minister, the so-called liberal bloc of the Russian government. The reason for that is that nobody in Russia needs any more turmoil, any more shakeups than already occurred. Everything has to go very smoothly. And actually, Putin is a master of that. He is a master balancer. So Nabiullina stays as basically a figurehead because she's incapable by her nature. She's a very traditional and semi-Western trained economist. And so she is not able to actually transition. She doesn't even have the courage to do that. In a way, I can compare her to Merkel, who is great when times are good because, you know, she's a functionary, she's a technician, but she's not a strategist. She's not a evolutionary, I should say. But names of those who now form the shadow board of governors for the Russian financial system are not disclosed. I actually have those names. I do have them, and I will include them in my Earthshift report, which is coming out. You can go on Futurist Trendcast or Lada.info, and this report will be called Game of Rubles. Should be up in about 2 weeks on Lada.info. In this Earthshift report, I will include the names of those economists who are a part of this shadow board of governors. This is actually very good news that there is a shadow board of governors. Why it's important for Russia? Because in the West, we actually all know who follow these things, that in the West, pretty much take the president of the US. It's usually a figurehead who decides very little. Sometimes they do, but oftentimes, and more often than not, there are shadow government, shadow personalities that decide behind the scenes, and they're not visible. So try and trace them. Who really decides what? In Russia, on the other hand, the leaders were always open for all to see, which opened them to an attack or to manipulation. Which has happened to so many leaders like Gorbachev and Yeltsin and Khrushchev. Take these three. And so this situation when the actual brain trust, the actual decision-making body is hidden, that's a very good idea. So these are the people who are very forward-looking, and we are seeing a lot of changes already. Can
you give us an example?
Yes, I'm getting to that. While Putin was missing, or right before that, in that time frame, that was the beginning of March, about March 6th, he disappeared. Let me backtrack a little. Everybody probably remembers that in December of 2014, a massive attack on the ruble took place. Ruble tanked by more than about one half, not more than one half, but about 45 to 50%. And now it just very slightly up from those from the lows. December and into January, Russians have dealt with it a little bit. It was also, the attack was massive and organized by outside sources. There's a lot of proof of that. There are millions of calls, for example, and millions of text messages that were placed to people, to various clients of various banks, telling them to take their money out or else, because the bank is out of money. And they were trying to create this run on the banks. It didn't work for a variety of reasons. And again, this is going to be a part of my report, Game of Rubles, that people will be able to read on Lada.info. So Russians dealt with that attack. And just around the beginning of March, one of the Russian banks named Открытие means discovery, basically, tried to initiate another attack on the ruble. And I think that Putin's disappearance right around that time is connected directly to that attack. So this bank is connected to the Russian liberal leader Chubais, who was responsible for a lot of reforms in the 90s that resulted in disenfranchising of the Russian population, closing of many enterprises and companies, creation of the class of the oligarchs, and empowering of the masses. And Chubais is widely considered in Russia a U.S. Trojan horse and a direct agent of NWO. Literally, some people, such as Nikolai Starikov, the famous geopolitical writer in Russia and analyst, he calls him a phone line to the U.S. and NWO. That's what he calls, more or less. I mean, I'm rephrasing Chubais. So Chubais is completely distrusted, but he's kept close to the Kremlin in order to, keep your friends close, but enemies closer, per Sun Tzu philosophy. So the traitors' attack on the ruble was traced to this bank Открытие. And as a result, the bank trading accounts are being investigated. They've been frozen at the time. I don't know what the absolute latest is on that, but there was an ongoing investigation into that. And Russians may never even disclose the results of that investigation. Then Putin kind of sort of disappears from the public eye. And now we are finding out what the results are of that relative seclusion and talking to a lot of thinkers, analysts, and economists who are at the cutting edge of this, creating the future system. So the Russian credit card system is up. I wrote about it in 2014, and we discussed it on several occasions, that I predicted that Russians will be abandoning Visa and MasterCard, and that they would be producing their own system. And I also said back in 2014 that system was half ready, that it needed testing, and we should see it pretty soon. And here we go. So now they're saying that the stage 1 is complete, so the processing center has been built. Now they are proceeding to stage 2, which is the changeover from the Western MC and Visa to the Russia's own credit card, and then they will be working on Eurasian Union and then and China, and then international recognition of this new system. So basically, we are present this year. We know already that China has its own credit card system. Now Russia is getting its own, and I believe Japan also has its own credit card system that functions outside of the dollar system altogether. The difficulty here is that you have to balance all the currencies, and with the ruble that tanked almost by half at one point, and it's still pretty low, there is a bit of a exchange balance that is an issue. That is part of why it is developing relatively slowly, and this is also why ruble need to be attacked. They wanted to slow down Russian development. Well, it's not just Russian development we're talking about, but entire Eurasia, entire BRICS, including entire South and Latin America, not just South America, but entire Latin America, which is very deeply involved with Russia, trade-wise and relationship-wise. So it affects everybody, even slows down the development of Eurasian Union. Also, what was announced is that Russia will be participating as one of the founding members in the Asian Bank of Infrastructure Investments that is spearheaded by China. That's another thing that has been developed during this time. And now this bank is up to 40 countries, and Russia, I mean, China is the controlling member of the bank, And the bank is being built in direct competition to the US-controlled IMF. Another very important development. This is all Eurasian development. A lot of European countries, as probably most listeners already know, have expressed interest in participating in the Bank of Infrastructure Investments. And loans through this bank will be given out to those countries that have a problem or don't want to go to IMF. A very, very important development is the Silk Road project. This is a joint Russia and China development, but what Russia has announced, and that was also required certain negotiations during this closed-in period, that the Silk Road project will include entire Eurasian Union. Of course, other countries within Eurasian Union, such as Belarus, Kazakhstan, but also countries like Armenia and Kyrgyzstan that is joining. And there are others in line, like Tajikistan is in line also to join. These are countries with very destroyed economy. And not Kazakhstan and Belarus, but the countries I named lately. And these economies need a lot of boost. So this new Bank of Infrastructure Investments, as well as the new Silk Road project, will be working together. Another one, I'm just naming projects that are emerging out of all this. Another great project that is connected to the Silk Road is the new high-speed railroad Beijing-Moscow. And also during this entire period, China and Russia are also developing this blended relationship with all other Eurasian Union relations. Russia also actually started on April 1st, which was what, yesterday, I believe, the rotating chairmanship in the BRICS. The BRICS Bank is starting this year under Russian chairmanship auspices, and it's supposed to become a fully developed bank this year. This is one of Russia's plans. So the capitalization of the BRICS Bank is 100 billion, and is built in conjunction with the Asian Bank of Infrastructure Developments. Each country will have equal shares, 20% of the total capital. And it's also going to be working in the same kind of vein to give infrastructure projects that are important to Eurasia and to South America and possibly Africa as well, to give them priority. So a lot of exciting.
Hey, Lada, if you don't mind, could I ask a few questions, or at least a couple, about the Putin going away thing? Because I think before we get into the Asian Bank and all this kind of stuff, listeners are going to be curious to hear some more about the Putin approach there. So first, I would say, by the way, I don't know that this is relevant, but when he went missing, like the first day or so, I remember seeing on a Russian news site somewhere, or blog or something, something to the effect that Putin was changing his means of commuting to work, and and that security was being kind of shaken up and being rearranged. And so this immediately made me think that there's some fear of a, quote unquote, removal plot or something going on, or that they wanted to give the image of that. So you don't think there was any internal attempt at a coup or anything like that?
No, there was no internal attempt at a coup.
Okay.
But they were changing his security, and the reason and testing it. That's why that was another reason he had to basically be quiet during that time and kind of disappear a little bit. He didn't really disappear. There were some televised conversations with lesser politicians, where you don't have to go all out and don't have to go to the Kremlin. Things like that don't happen in the Kremlin, but say at his Novogorova residence near Moscow, like conversations with lesser politicians, head of some kind of committee within the Duma or something like that. So during this time, what was happening? Yes, security was not changed per se, but tested up and down, vetted in and out because of Nemtsov killing just a few days prior. Any leader and the security services of any leader would do such a thing when a killing of a major politician happens literally 200 meters from the Kremlin wall. Who wouldn't do that? But this time was used, as I said, to meet with thinkers, to pull together resources, because what is understood here by everybody in Russia, and as I said, I spoke about that in so many articles and interviews with you, Paul, and everywhere, that this is an all-out attack on Russia. This is something that Russians have to deal with. When you have somebody killed right next to the walls of the Kremlin, there are so many other signals. Attack on the ruble, now another attack on the ruble at the same exact time. These are signals. Enough already. They cannot postpone reforms anymore. So they sat down and worked out what they need to do, the major strategy. Putin was being pushed to start moving in the direction of the nationalization of the ruble, which means that the central bank basically becomes controlled by the state again. Right now, central bank formally is independent, but informally and in reality, in truth, it is actually a division of the Fed. And it is regulated based on the so-called Washington consensus. And I will be talking at length about that in my shift report, as I said. So all this together, the strategy has to be changed, but it's a system. You can't just say, 1, 2, 3, done. I'm changing it. You have to develop the whole system, so it takes time.
Well, Lada, that gets into the next question, which is, you said that really he disappeared as part of setting up a shadow system, more or less. And the question
not exactly a shadow system, I call it that, but a system that would be more protected from outside influences by both virtue of not being advertised very out there, and also, people will still find out, but you don't advertise it, and you also keep these people protected. Soviet Union did a good job at things like that. Very good job, excellent job. Russia has to borrow some of the Soviet experiences. As far as I'm concerned, Russia has become way too open, and the dark forces in the US, in EU, Ukraine, you name it, or all out there, whatever those forces are, and you all know what those forces are, incidentally. These forces are taking advantage of the excessive openness of the Russian political, geopolitical, economic systems. Okay, so it's time to pull it back.
Sure, I can, that's totally logical. But then the next question would be, let me put it this way. There's a famous economics figure in Russia named Mikhail Kazin.
Kazin, right? Mikhail Kazin. Mm-hmm.
Yes, and he. I saw him in an interview where he basically was asked, he'd been pushing for more serious changes in the economic front in Russia. And he said, look, the problem is at the top, they've all been trained in the West, and their entire value is based on Western connections and Western knowledge. But it's easy to get rid of one figure, like the leader of the bank. But everybody under her is the same, right? In other words, you need to replace 100 people, not one.
He's right.
And where are you going to find 100 people with a totally different mindset who are competent? And so that's my question to you is, let's say that in the theme of that nationalizing the ruble, that they actually want to do that and that Putin is working on that. Do you think they actually have the kind of managerial depth or whatever? I mean, can they do that, I guess is my question to you.
Right. I got it. They can do it, but very slowly. And they are doing it very slowly because of that. Because Hazin is correct. Hazin is very smart. He's too negative. This is why I don't recommend it as one of my recommended Russian analysts. But he's absolutely correct in this diagnosis. The depth is not there. This is why what I said before. They need to change a system, which you cannot do in one day. This is a process, but you have to start somewhere. So if you start from the top, as is very common for Russia, starting something at the top, not at the bottom. And there is absolutely nothing wrong with that. It's just that Russia is that kind of country. And generally the world now works this way. So they initiate this at the top and then it trickles down little by little. It requires a whole system of oversight, training. And what is most important is the new economic theory and practice have to be developing together. There is new economic theory that has been developed by several institutes, and they've been on and off, like coming into the picture, coming off the picture, and society demands that change. Society really, really demands that change. So when we're talking about the liberal wing of the Russian government, which is the entire economic wing, including economics minister, Nabiulina is an intermediate figure. She really is not considered the liberal or Western-oriented. She's like a compromise between the two, like say the patriotic wing, we could call it, and the liberal wing. As she was kind of suitable for both, but Russian government is forced to, Putin is forced to keep the Russian government with the economic wing as liberally Western trained, because that's the only system that has been available in the world. That includes China as well, not just Russia. So as the new economic theory is being developed, and that's very hard to do when you have complete dominance in the world of one financial system, petrodollar. It's very difficult to do because you don't have enough experience, enough examples to develop, because you have to run it through testing. Well, you can't even test it. So it will be developing through the years. And it would take a few years to complete the changeover. But these people who were Western trained, I keep thinking Russian economics minister, Russian energy minister, as well as others. When I think about these people, they are learning themselves. So if they're actually good economists and smart people, and I don't know, other people know more about them than I do, how good they are in their posts. Some actually say good things about them, others bash them because they're too Western oriented, but they might be good managers. They might be good economists. They're learning too. And I already noticed that they are changing their how they talk. For example, was it Russian economics minister? I'm not sure. One of them who said recently that, sorry, he says, I can't have, until our law has different letters in it, you will not hear different numbers from me. In other words, until the law is rewritten. And that brings us to the issue of the Russian constitution, which has been written in the 1990s. If you can imagine, the Russian constitution was written by Americans who were hired by Yeltsin. And it says some certain things that Russians basically find that outrageous. So in some people think that constitution has to be changed, and others believe that this constitution has to be thrown out completely, a new one rewritten that will work in the interests of the country. What kind of constitution is that says that the natural resources of the country, it doesn't say that they belong to the people of the country? In other words, any private owner from another country owns natural resources of the place of, say, whatever he is developing, whether it's oil or gas or something else. That's outrageous. That's selling out the country. That's what was done in 1990s during Yeltsin, and Chubais was there, incidentally, and Nemtsov, who was recently assassinated near the Kremlin, were all participants of that kind of system.
I totally. The topic is still Putin, and it's still on his disappearance. But I want to ask a question. I know that the ladies of the world are wondering about. Did Putin's lady actually have a baby during this period, and did he go to Switzerland to see her and the baby? Or do your inside sources say anything about that?
No, I don't think it has anything to do with that. This was somebody's hoax, or maybe it was even something that even the Kremlin spread around. I don't think so, but there's so much disinformation floating around. Most of it, because these are information war attacks on Russia, trying to discredit Putin or trying to, and some people are just simply speculating. And this makes for such a great headline, don't you think? It's you will get a lot of viewership if you're a blogger and you just came up with this. Oh, his lady had a baby and he went to see her in Switzerland. No, I don't think so. At least
I mean, I didn't see that. I thought it was a great thing if it happened. I mean, I was, rooting for him and her and the baby, but, it just, so I mean, if it's disinformation, it's fairly good disinformation. In the sense that it was, it made him look virile and touching and, like a family, I know he's been divorced, being a good family man as opposed to just, being off with the flu or something.
Right. He actually, I think 10 days was a legitimate time off in order to develop a new financial system and a future-oriented kind of strategy for Russia. I think that's enough of a reason, in my opinion.
That's really practical. It's not as, that's so boring compared to, a little bit of, I don't know, and it's something different than, riding bears or horses with bareback or whatever.
Right.
Melody, I get the feeling you didn't pay attention. Melody, I get the feeling you didn't pay attention to all the stories that he'd hurt his back and an Austrian back surgeon came to Moscow.
Oh, I
that
didn't. No, I
didn't too much.
But I'm just saying, I thought that the baby was a lot more fun than he had the flu or his back was out or, he was all these other things. I just, I was actually, there was just part of me that I didn't think it was likely, but there was a little part of me hoping that maybe that was actually what was actually going on. Because, I can actually see taking time, because really, seriously, that does make the most sense given what little I know of his personality, was that he was actually off doing really serious stuff and, talking with advisors and redoing his security and, revamping the entire economic system or banking system of Russia. That makes a lot more sense. But, I think I just like to think of him as being a little bit more human sometimes. And also, I think it also shows.
Go ahead.
I think it also too what the kind of thing that people actually tend to pay attention to when they read the paper. Even me sometimes.
Well, I don't read papers, and I don't watch TV, because I just generally disapprove of Western MSM. So. I heard all these stories, but and everybody can pick and choose the story that fits their fancy. I'm inviting everybody to keep speculating if they want to about that. But I'm telling you what I know was really going on, and what is now surfacing, what is emerging, because I'm listening to the actual meetings of the Russian government. That's what they're discussing right now. This is what they're talking about, which is consistent with what went on.
Yeah, excuse me, but it actually, in all seriousness, what it sounds to me is that what you're talking about is to some degree, a very cautious realigning again of Russia and China as allies. Is that the case?
Well, Russia and China never fell out as allies. What makes you think that they fell out? There was no falling out as allies.
Well, they seem to kind of go off in other directions there for a while, though. Maybe that was just the way the Western press reported it.
Maybe
well,
that's what Western
in Khrushchev's time, or are we talking now? I mean, I thought that there was the famous break in Soviet Chinese relations.
I thought you were talking about the past couple of months, or are you talking about historically since 1950s?
I'm
Melanie,
talking about
which
I haven't really, Catherine, to be honest, I'm not, this is not my field, okay? But the impression I had was that they weren't, for the last 20 years or so, they hadn't been like opposed to each other necessarily, but I hadn't always got the feeling they were on the same page. And this is almost talking about not exactly an economic union, but certainly if they're reviving the Silk Road and going to be investing in projects and building railroads between Moscow and Beijing, that's pretty serious cooperation. Mm-hmm. And I just didn't realize that degree of cooperation had been going on.
Well, the degree of cooperation is actually even greater than what I discussed in the first few sentences. Basically, yes, if we go just slightly into history, if I may, just a few phrases so that everybody's on the same page, including all the listeners. Russia and China. This topic was, if we're talking historically, in mid 20th century, during the Second World War, what happened was that Russia helped the Communist Party of China first to kick out Japanese invasion, and then also to stay in power and really fortify their state. And the Communist Party, in all truth, was the only popular party after the Second World War and during as well in China, because they showed that they were the only ones capable of kicking out the invaders. Same happened, incidentally, with the Soviet Union. And that's falsified history. You will never hear this in the West. But in reality, I wrote that in one of my prior articles. I think you saw it, Paul, about what really went on in 1945. We even had this discussion about how quickly Germans changed their attitude. In April of 1945, they still believed that Hitler was about to win the war against Russia, and then everything will be champagne and roses. And by May 2nd through May 8th of the same year, they were forming lines into soup kitchens organized by the Russian army when the Russian army took Berlin. And several months later, these same Germans were running with flowers and tears after the Russian tanks. I've seen plenty of footage of that. Sorry to let them go. When they were leaving Germany, most of the troops were leaving Germany. Some contingent was staying, but most of the army was leaving. So Germans were sorry to see them go. And that's how it was all over Europe. Everybody greeted the Soviet army as liberators, and the communist parties were legitimately the parties that were the most popular in various countries of Europe. And I'm talking Italy, I'm talking France, I'm talking Germany, of course, Hungary, Czechia, Serbia, you name it, Bulgaria, because these were the only parties that managed to organize themselves and fight fascism and fight invaders when they were occupying their country or as partisans or as part of the Soviet army. So it was that popular. Of course, that history was completely falsified. Same happened in China. And so Chinese people and Chinese leadership, Mao, when he came to power, was extremely grateful to the Soviet Union and was considered himself the biggest fan and disciple of Stalin and Lenin as well, of course. And he was big friends with Stalin. There was the song I remember, which was way before my day, but I remember my mother sometimes reciting that song with the giggle, can you imagine? We had a song like that, he would say. And the song went like this: Stalin and Mao are listening to us. Well, with pictures that depicted the two leaders and all that. So my mother, who was a child during Stalin's times, is like, can you imagine we had a song like that? She would tell me. And then Stalin was killed. He didn't die his own death. He was actually poisoned, which has been proven already by Russian researchers, including Nikolai Starikov. And so when he was, or at least that's a very prevailing version of events. And so at that point, Khrushchev comes to power, and Mao blamed Khrushchev from departing from the communist principles, and also he apparently suspected he was at fault at Stalin's death. And at that point, Russia and China went their separate ways, which later in the 70s was very skillfully used by Kissinger and by the US in basically resetting a relationship with China at the expense of the Soviet Union. And Soviet Union, of course, what can I say? Soviet leaders were idiots that they allowed that to happen. And at that point, China became that engine of growth, started becoming that engine of growth that it is today for the world, as US started transferring manufacturing into China, which we know the result of all that everybody is now unhappy that US actually drained itself of its industrial base by transferring all of its manufacturing to China, which is what made China this powerful economic force today. But that came at a cost at the time of Russia and China splitting up. So during 1990, we had this episode with Tiananmen Square in China, which was around the time that Gorbachev was giving up on the Soviet Union, and the Soviet Union was about to implode. And that was a very difficult time for Chinese leadership, who didn't know which way to go. And we all know the Tiananmen Square story. So they stayed within what they felt was the right ideology and the right political system for the country. They decided not to depart. And actually, history has proven them right, because look what happened to Russia in the 1990s, that terrible turmoil. And look how well and pretty smoothly China has done, and how well they have done throughout the same period. At the time, in 1990, Soviet economy was several times as big as Chinese economy in 1990, okay? And it was about 20% of world economy. Right now, Russia's economy, after all these republics fell off, so to speak, to the wayside, but Russia was always the main economy of the Soviet Union. Right now, Russia's economy is about 2.5% to 3% of world economy, compared 20% to 3%. Meanwhile, China's economy grew exponentially during the same period. Which is why Russian politicians and other Russians are kicking themselves that how come they fell for this Western fallacy and Chinese did not. Well, of course, China has its own problems, tons of them, and I'm not going to go into that. I'm just saying economically, just if you go by numbers, you get China as basically number one economy in the world, because the way GDP is counted is a complete fallacy. So in reality, US GDP is not what is portrayed to be. China should be the number one economy right now. But the way GDP is calculated is to suit American and Western economies, not to suit manufacturing economies, not to suit resource-based economies, is to suit a Western-based model. Well, but it will change too. My prediction, give it no more than 10 years, and GDP, or it might be called something else, will be calculated very differently, and US GDP will then, everybody will see that it's not as big as it appears to be today. So by 2000, by the year 2000, Russia and China started getting back together when Putin came to power. Putin made it one of the priorities, and then the BRICS appeared. The BRICS story is very interesting because the idea of the BRICS, basically at first it was BRIC, which was four countries, I'm sorry. Then South Africa was added to it. So BRIC idea was first expressed by Goldman Sachs, which is why some people make a mistake in their confusion. They think that this is actually one of the NWO projects. It's not. It's just that Russia and China looked at each other and said, oh, great idea. Why don't we take it and run with it? And they did. They got together with Brazil and India, and they said, you know what, guys, well, they're onto something here. How about we take this idea and make it happen? And they did. And then very quickly it became understood throughout the 2000s, while Putin was in power primarily in those first 8 years, that Russia and China were really the two countries that needed to stick together, because while India and Brazil are important economically, but they have no political pool, no political power whatsoever. They are basically zero, political zero. That's the truth. Well, they are starting to gain a little bit, but they really mean nothing in the grand scheme of things. Meanwhile, Russia is that great balancer of the world, and China holds that economic power that nobody can rival. Actually, U.S. cannot even attack China anymore, because economic power of China is too great for them. Well, they try. It's not like they don't do it, but they don't succeed. So that's where we are. So Russia and China realized that it is very important to them for them to stick together, and that brings me to the great balancer of the world, which is Russia. So Russia, in any guise, whether it was the Russian Empire before 1917, or whether it was the Soviet Union throughout the 20th century, or Russia today, is what I call, according to my Earthshift system, the yin-yang balancer, or the great balancer of the world. This is basically karmic and historic role that for as long as I know the known history, that I can trace back, Russia always played this role. And that is because Russia occupies, or this is why Russia rather occupies, such a large part of Eurasia, which will bring us very smoothly into the Eurasian, what is really Eurasia. So Russia balances the yin, which is like nurturing, feminine, very quiet, peaceful, inward-looking cultures, and the yang cultures of the West, which are aggressive, assertive, initiating, male, dominating, and all that has to be balanced, because yin can be very effective too. Look at China. And yang, meanwhile, can be very ineffective and very harmful. Look at what is happening, all the aggression, military aggression, petrodollar, and everything that is coming from the West towards other countries surrounding Russia and China, with bases, over 700 of U.S. bases all over the world, the army, very aggressive stance, attacking other countries. We all know the story. So at this point, because Russia has become so small for the role of the global balancer, what Russia is now is too small. It needs larger territory and more people to balance the world effectively. And because of that, it needs strong allies. And so Russia, who was the initiator of the BRICS, formed the BRICS for that, to help balance. So Brazil, South Africa, India, and China, they're helping Russia balance the world. Especially China. And China is, I cannot overemphasize the role of China in all this, primarily economical role, and a little bit of political. As far as military role, it's not as strong, obviously. It cannot match the U.S. But together, Russia and China present this force that U.S. cannot penetrate, or the West in general cannot penetrate. That's why they are getting closer and closer together, and they will stay close. They will stay close probably, well, for as long as it's necessary to properly rebalance the world. Okay, so unless you have questions, I might talk about what is really Eurasian, how all this is connected.
Oh, no, that's a good start. How do you see Eurasia and the Eurasian Union, and anything you want to say?
So first, let me just say a few things of what is Eurasia again, so everybody is on the same page. Eurasia is not what most lay people in the West understand it to be. For some reason, for somebody who actually went to a secondary school where they actually taught real geography back in Russia, back in the old days, it's very strange for me to hear that Eurasia is what is basically coincides more or less with the borders of the former Soviet Union. No, Eurasia is all of Europe, including Western Europe, Central Europe, Eastern Europe, and the European part of Russia, up to the Urals. That's all Europe. And Caucasus is included in that. I once heard somebody complaining, how come Azerbaijan participates in Eurovision? Isn't it in Caucasus? You know what? Yes, it is. And that's because Caucasus is part of Europe. And so is the European part of Russia up to the Ural Mountains. Guess what? That's all Europe. And then Asia starts, and that's all of Siberia, excuse me, plus China, India, the Middle East, all of the Middle East, most of it rather, because some of what is considered the Middle East is actually located in kind of Africa. Like, say, for example, Egypt is part of the Middle East, traditionally, historically, because it's one of the Muslim countries, but it is located, in fact, in Africa. Yet Turkey, which occupies, of course, the westernmost tip of that Asian portion of Asia, right? It's protruding into the Mediterranean Sea, but it also has a tiny part with Istanbul on the European side. So that's how Eurasia actually works. It's the entire Europe, entire Asia, and as Paul correctly pointed out, it's from Lisbon all the way to Vladivostok, or to Kamchatka, if you will. Well, so this is one continent, in fact, and the reason it was necessary to divide it into two and say this is Europe and this is Asia, and Europe ends around Poland and Czechoslovakia and Bulgaria and whatnot. Before that, it ended at Austria and Germany when it was the Soviet bloc. Now it extended all the way into Poland, Czechia, Slovakia, Bulgaria, and Romania because they're part of the Eurasian Union. But no, it actually keeps going and going and going. So there was this Putin's plan, which is now slowly being realized and which is very, very interesting. Putin's plan since the beginning of 2000s proposed to Germany was to have one Eurasian space from, as he put it, Lisbon to Vladivostok. And of course, that Germans started very timidly, possibly moving in that direction. And so that made us all hopefully talk about the new alliance forming between Germany, Russia, and China, which would be this Great Silk Road. But it wasn't called Great Silk Road at the time. And now the Silk Road is emerging as a title. But then U.S., of course, could not allow that to happen. And as, again, my readers know, those who follow me on Futurist Trendcast, I wrote a lot about it. The idea for everything that is happening and has been happening since last year in Ukraine was to put a rift between Western Europe and Russia. So they would be unable to form that alliance, that Silk Road that would connect the technology of Germany and France to the resources and transportation capability of Russia to the manufacturing base of China, which would create this mega development project that actually would be the engine of growth for the entire planet, actually taking the entire planet into the new millennium properly. So it's balanced. It would be a great idea for Russia as the great balancer of the world. Takes a lot of pressure off and rebalances their entire system, giving a balanced, cooperative capability to the entire world economy. But see, for U.S., the way the U.S. empire is structured now, not for the American people, obviously, because that drains American people, what this predatory capitalism that exists presently in the country, in addition to the rest of the population of the world. For the U.S. empire, that would be a disaster, because then petrodollar is gone overnight, literally, and they cannot live over the rest of the world, just like they did for such a long time. And that's why they needed to put a rift. And that's why they need to create a new Iron Curtain, or whatever it's going to be called, whatever they're trying to create, and paint Russia as a villain. This is the main underlying reason for everything that is going on in Ukraine today, and for all these attacks on the Russian ruble, for sanctions against Russia, because they're hurting everybody, but they're also putting a rift between Europe and Russia, and distrust is growing. So it will take a while to rebuild. So Eurasia is all that. And so what Russia had to do, because of this success, U.S. succeeded, let's face it, in 2014, U.S. succeeded in putting this huge rift between Europe, that started getting closer to Russia and a little bit further away from the U.S., and Russia. Well, of course, European leaders, with a lot of delay, started understanding what they're facing, where all this is going, but it will take a while to rebuild. So Russia was forced to go around this. What Putin has done, he, for example, established really important relations with Turkey. And so the South Stream, I believe we discussed it last time, South Stream is abandoned as a project that goes at the bottom of the Black Sea through Bulgaria into Central Europe and Southern Europe, delivers Russian gas to bypass very unpredictable and dangerous Ukraine. Instead, they're building a new pipeline that will go to Turkey. This is called Turkish Stream, and it will go to the border with Greece. Well, this is connected with what happened in Greece recently when Syriza, the left-wing party, took power, and Syriza will be working on trying to get the pipeline to go through their territory and further, because that will be very beneficial for the Greek economy on so many levels, and they can benefit from transit fees. They can sell that gas. They can get huge discounts on gas. And so little by little, it's chipping away from the EU. But of course, US and EU will be working very hard to reestablish, to rebalance it back in their favor. Well, another thing was when Putin recently met with Egyptian president, and they signed huge new contracts, basically energy contracts. It's also going to be very interesting. So these countries, such as Egypt and Turkey, they're very important in this rebalancing of powers. And in this rebalancing of the world, it's kind of like chipping away little by little, okay? But meanwhile, this is only part of it. Countries like Turkey and like Egypt, they also want to become basically associate members of Eurasian Union, and they might be admitted pretty soon. India was looking at that as well, and Eurasian Union then becomes a kind of this collective of countries that will be working together to again rebalance everything. In this regard, a very important role is being played by Belarus and Kazakhstan. These two are not really that important economically, but they're very important geopolitically, because if you look at the map, you will see that they it's like an armchair. Russia needs a little bit more balancing, because it's when you're trying to balance, you want your arms spread out as wide as possible to help you balance. So Belarus and Kazakhstan are playing the role of the armchair, like arms of the armchair. Okay, so they're helping Russia balance. And that's their very important geopolitical role. That's why they are part of the Eurasian Union, and they will continue being a very, very important part of that. But the most important relationship in all this is actually between Russia and China, of course, because these are two major economies and major geopolitical players as well. And so it's very important, everything that Russia and China do, from building the new pipeline to building this new major railroad, et cetera, the new banks, that's where all the that's what everybody should be observing. That's what we all need to monitor and look at very closely, because that's the most important relationship that exists. Well, generally speaking, in the next for the next period that we are in right now, say next 10 years, there are 4 major geopolitical players. And these are, and I'm talking the next 10 years, because then other players already are starting to emerge and they will keep growing. But right now we have 4 geopolitical players in the world, which are China, Russia, US, and EU. And of course, US and EU are basically on one side, Russia and China kind of on another. And in this scenario, the EU is like in the between kind of thing. By themselves, EU doesn't have geopolitical or military power. US has a little too much power. And the EU can only act as part of another alliance. But they're trying to create some semblance of independence, of sovereignty, but they really are not succeeding. Plus, EU is also torn by its own internal problems, and some countries might actually be exiting the EU. It might be restructured eventually, so the project is not working very well. Russia and China are independent players, and they can get together or they can work independently, as Melody actually pointed out. In the past couple of months, I observed that Russia and China were doing their own thing. Russia was working on one thing, China on another, and that's how it's supposed to be, because they have to do this. One single country can't do everything else, and so China became that. They organized this new infrastructure development bank, and they're spearheading that effort. And Russia, meanwhile, has to work on other efforts like Eurasian Union, like SCO, the BRICS Bank, etc., etc. So that's how basically they divided responsibilities, which is to me that's a sign of a very good relationship, excellent organization, and trust, which is not what is happening between EU and US. Well, basically, that's the story.
Okay. And how would you describe, I guess what you would say is all of the projects that are Eurasian projects, the Silk Road, the string of pearls along the ocean, that kind of stuff. Any thoughts on that?
Well, I should really talk about the Silk Road. There are lots of details to that. But the main purpose, basically, that's initiated by China as well, and Chinese have about $3 trillion US dollars in reserves. Plus, they have other currencies as well. They have to do something with that money. This is way excessive, and it is also the way the world financial system is structured. Again, I will have details about that in the Earthshift report, why they have to keep that much in reserve. Even when they want to get rid of it, it's very hard for them to do that. So they have to spend some of that money. They have money for major infrastructure projects, therefore. So the Silk Road is one of them. Railroads through the Russian Far East and Beijing-Moscow Railroad and the new Power of Siberia pipeline that will take gas to China, plus the Nicaragua Canal, which will rival the Panama Canal. These are the biggest projects that China is now investing in, because they are unable to spend excess of their reserves in any other way. Well, and these projects are necessary regardless. They're geopolitically necessary, economically, etc. So the new Silk Road is a very exciting project. As I said before, it will be uniting, basically the idea is to unite Western Europe through Russia being that, again, balancer and the bridge, with all of Asia, primarily with China, but also all of Asia. And they're starting it smaller right now. They're not including Europe, but they're hoping Europe, especially through this new infrastructure development bank, will start getting into it. And at this point, we have Russia said that they want all the Eurasian Union countries to participate in this project. So all these poor countries, their economies will be lifted, including Kyrgyzstan, whose economy is practically shot. Tajikistan also suffering, but in a better shape because they have gas on their territory. And Armenia, which is cut off basically, but things are developing little by little. They're kind of building up into something. And then all the surrounding countries, such as Vietnam, Korea, well, right now it's North Korea, but South Korea possibly will also be a part of it, and other countries, whatever surrounds China. India will, of course, participate in this. Then certain Muslim countries will be pulling in, such as Iran. So it's not going to be a duplicate of the previous Silk Road. And as we know, previous Silk Roads functioning during medieval times through Persia and through Central Asia, what is today Central Asia. There are two Silk Roads, as far as I know. Maybe there are some minor ones as well, but the two main Silk Roads of medieval times, one went through Samarkand, which is in Uzbekistan, Central Asia, and former Russian Republic of Uzbekistan, and another went through Persia into China and India. It's not a direct recreation of those Silk Roads, and of course methods of working with them will be very different. It's going to be most likely railroads, which is where Russia shines, because with the Russian railroads are already very strong, plus building new railroads is especially great. So all that will unite the economies of Asia, Central Asia, Southeast Asia, Central Asia. Japan might also be a part of this as well. Of course, Russia and some economies, at least, of the Middle East. The idea, again, is to unite Eurasia in this more like Southern and Eastern Eurasia into this one humming hub of economic activity, cooperation activity, where people, based on working with each other, on drawing on strengths of each culture, each economy, they can do this trade that will be outside of the dollar zone. It will be completely outside of the dollar. And this project will...
Hey, Lada, if I may interrupt on that,
Sure.
I would say that the obvious point, looking at a map, is that the United States dominates the world's oceans. And a very large percentage of the Eurasia project is based on not depending on the oceans that much.
Excellent point. That's absolutely correct. And
also, as an example, you talked about the Nicaraguan Canal, which many are skeptical of, but there's another project to build a waterway from, I guess, the Andaman Sea across Thailand, so that the ships don't need to go around Singapore. And Singapore is another point controlled by the U.S. and British military.
Right. Well,
and
unfortunately,
yeah. I'm sorry. Anyway, go ahead.
Unfortunately, Thailand is also controlled by the U.S., so don't have any illusions here. It's completely and absolutely just like Thailand and Philippines. They are controlled by the U.S. Rather, they could be not so controlled if only it wasn't that corrupt there. And of course, they are weak. Politically, geopolitically, they are weak regimes, so they cannot resist. They simply don't have the possibility, the capability, and the prowess to resist basically U.S. pressure on them. So there's really, I don't know. It's Nicaragua project. Yeah, I know a lot of people are skeptical about it, and some believe that this is actually done as, we will build it someday, but for now, let us have some bases here. So to have presence, in other words, in that area. And that's actually correct. It is to have presence for the Russian Navy and Russian fleet, Russian aviation, to have a base there, and for China to have a certain base that is basically buying an option to build, like buying an option to create a movie. This is buying an option to build, or out of a book, right? To build a canal there. But I think that it will happen eventually. It might take a while, because just imagine what kind of pressure US is putting so that it wouldn't happen. And make no mistake, everybody is getting that pressure. Absolutely everybody.
Oh, by the way, Lada, since I just spent a fair bit of time in Thailand, I would comment that it's pretty obvious there, or for that matter, just opening yahoo.com and seeing the news, that the U.S. government is almost at a state of war with the Thai government. The U.S. government strongly backed the Red movement, and there was another coup, of course, to bring in the Yellows there. And the Yellows are very much trying to be friends with China and Russia. Setting aside the pros and cons of those two groups internally, just saying diplomatically speaking, I would say it's pretty obvious that the U.S. is most unhappy with the current government there.
Well, that's a different story. I'm sorry, I should have qualified, but we have so many topics.
As far as corruption, yeah, of course, everything can be bought there, and the U.S. has plenty of money and so on.
Right. I should have qualified what I said about Thailand, because we have so many topics to discuss. I have to go over everything very quickly, and I'm just giving you an overview of what I see as a general picture. But you're absolutely right. But listen, okay, U.S.
We're
is
going to run out of time,
with,
so
yeah, no. I want to explain this to you, because your point is well taken, and some people might have this issue with what I said. But I'm going to give you another example. What is happening between U.S. and Israel right now? Netanyahu comes to the U.S. And there is a storm of applause. They applaud, a standing ovation to him when he talks to Congress. And Obama and Netanyahu snub each other. Who is U.S. not happy with today? There is no country. They are unhappy with Germany, their biggest ally, who admits themselves that they're completely like, we are your biggest allies, say Germans, and yet they're completely unhappy with them. They're unhappy with France. They're unhappy with UK. They're unhappy with all of their allies, because their policies are a disaster, and because people are awakening all over the world. That doesn't mean, however, that they still control Thailand, and they still control Philippines, and they still control Indonesia. But people are rising, and the governments are trying to resist. The stage at which they are right now is that they are trying to resist, but it is very difficult for them. Yes, they're unhappy with them, and this is happening all over the world. Basically, it's like, you're holding. Just imagine U.S. holding these hands full of gold or something, or water, say, and all that water sipping through their fingers, and they cannot stop it. is just disappearing out of their hands, because that's the process that is going on. However, they will be putting same can be said about Japan. Japan is trying to break free. You know more than I do probably about what's going on in Japan. We keep current on that on my blog through the comments of one of the readers who resides in Japan and who leaves comments about what's going on in the country. Same with Japan. They intermittently have very big problems with the government. Then they squeeze the government of Japan. They pressure them. They intimidate them, including possibly false flags and terrorist attacks. I'm not going to go into Fukushima here, but this is one of the theories. Same happens to Germany. Same happens to France. All these false flags that, it's one thing that it happens once. When it accumulates, and nothing happens that much by accident. Even those who are completely outside of conspiracy theory kind of circles, they'll say, this is very strange what is happening in the world, because pressure needs to be put constantly on those governments and those countries that attempt, that have their own point of view on things. And yes, Thailand is a natural ally for China, for Russia, and actually it's very popular, for example, for Russians to vacation in Thailand, and it's popular for everybody, of course.
Lada.
Yes.
I went to a town where more of the shops were in Cyrillic and had Russian on everything. The things I wanted to buy, and they only had Russian labels. They didn't have English labels. So, and certainly as far as people on the street, and this is after the ruble had collapsed. I'm told that a year ago it was much more dramatic. Some of these places, there would have been 10 times as many Russians as, let's say, North Americans or something.
Right.
Or, native English speakers. So clearly, economically, they've already become, as far as tourism goes, far more on the Russian side. But anyway, we can move on to other countries. I just think that Thailand is actually already much more interested in the Chinese-Russian sphere than let's say the Philippines. I think that's a totally different case. I think the Philippines is totally in the American zone at the moment. But anyway, those are just opinions, and we can move on to the rest of Eurasia and back to the Silk Road or whatever other points that you wanted to cover with the modern Silk Road. Mainly it's based on rail, right?
It's basically railroads. Reason being, in those climates, some of the climates we're talking about, and at distances, we're also talking such distances that it becomes inefficient for autobahns, autoroads, highways to be built and maintained properly. So railroads, Russians have tremendous experience with building railroads in the most adverse conditions. And this is going to be down via railroads, basically. Yeah, so that hoax that appeared recently, very interesting hoax, in my opinion. Actually, I would like that, railroad is, that a new road is being built from, I believe, from Germany. Russians are building together with Chinese from Germany all the way to Kamchatka, and then to the through the Bering Strait, and on to Alaska, through Canada to New York. Yes. Or was it Moscow to New York, or was it Berlin to New York? I don't remember where it starts. And again, all the spreads, everybody, oh my gosh, how is that possible? How is that going to work out? And the Russians corrected them and said, no, we are building a new railroad, not an auto road, that would connect Moscow to the outermost, basically to the border with Bering, to the Bering Strait, overlooking Alaska. But it's not supposed to go onto the Canada and the US side. The rest is up to them if they want to build that side. So the Eurasia is being built up, and with that, what we will see is that a more balanced and more multifaceted world where there will be regional centers that will, such as like Russia, which will unite a lot of lands around it, like China, Southeast Asia will be united around it. And just hypothetically speaking, well, of course, there's India with its own world. Hypothetically speaking, let's say Iran could unite certain areas, maybe Turkey can unite certain areas. Egypt certainly is a big a player in the Middle East. It's militarily and politically, it's the strongest country probably in the Middle East, while economically, Saudi Arabia would be the strongest country in the Middle East, and well, at least the richest country. I don't know if it's that strong, but it's rich. And then, of course, we have European Union as the center, and in whichever way it survives and morphs into in the next 5-10 years. And of course we have US, then we have Brazil with other Latin American countries such as Argentina and Venezuela, and all that is another center of influence. Then we have Africa with possibly 2 or 3 different maybe centers of influence, one of them being South Africa and or Egypt I named as well. And all these countries, all these centers of influence, this is how the world is supposed to enter the cooperative era, where predatory capitalism goes into the past, petrodollar is no more, and where we have a basket of various currencies. And that's what Russia and China are working on. See, neither Russia nor China is interested, like some people are suggesting, in rivaling US and unseating US as the sole superpower and becoming themselves a sole superpower. I can assure you China is not interested in that. They've been there, done that. Not sole superpower, but they were this large, huge empire. And then what they want to mine their interests, which are, of course, very expensive interests, but they are concentrated on what their country needs, what the needs of the populations are. Of course, they have economic interests globally and regionally as well. Russia also has economic interests and political interests and geopolitical and such. They're different from China's. And they also are not interested in being that one superpower, even one of the 2 superpowers. So what Russia and China want is a multipolar world where everybody basically have these rules that respect one another. Right now, we don't have that. We have a complete imbalance where the majority of the world is completely unhappy with what US is doing. So that's where the world is heading, and US is doing everything to sabotage that development of the world and to slow it down.
Well, I guess I would ask, though, what kind of alternative we're going to see. I mean, it's easy to be unhappy with aspects of the current system, but how can I put it? But I mean, since the end of the Soviet Union, there haven't been really like huge wars that, I mean, tragedies with what's going on in Iraq and now Syria. But on the other hand, you know what I'm trying to say? In other words, the U.S. has been this big cop. And I'm wondering, maybe a corrupt cop. How's that, right? A corrupt cop. And now we're trying to find some alternative. And I'm kind of wondering, I mean, I look around at countries and I'm not, both Russia and China seem to be well managed, but I have my doubts about, I don't know, let's take, for example, Germany. That's a key player. You know, are they really, how can I put it? Are they up for the task of creating a more neutral Eurasian kind of system?
I can answer. Short answer is Germany is totally not up to the task. They are so stuck in the 20th century, which again I wrote a lot about on my blog Futurist Trendcast. Why this is happening? They have wrong leadership. Merkel is totally not up to her task. She is too afraid to make a move one way or the other, trying to sit on two chairs with one ASS, and the result is for all to see. Problems in EU, problems between EU and Russia, problems between America and EU, etc., etc., etc. Goes on and on and on. Economy is not doing so great, but we also are going through a global shake up of the entire system, which I call the Earth shift. So this is revolutionary time. All this is expected, and confusion and not knowing whether you're going in the right direction or the wrong direction, doubts about yourself, about your country, about the whole world, about other countries are absolutely normal right now. This is because we are in uncharted territories right now. And what Russians are doing, what Chinese are doing, is all uncharted territory. And Germany is being invited to join in, and EU in general. And they are chickening out, first of all. Secondly, U.S. has too much on them, and NSA spied on all of them, including Merkel and others, not by accident. They've got a lot of goods on them. So they actually cannot move a muscle. Also, if they move a muscle in the wrong direction, as we've already seen, there are warnings that are being sent to them in the form of various false flags and such, that you can't go there. So all that, if they are chickens, because sometimes you just have to tough it out and just go through it, like Putin did.
Why don't since this is important, why don't you talk about Earthshift? I seem to recall you said there was one. Was it 1,000 years ago? Or can you tell us a little bit about Earthshifts, what they are, and why we're in one now?
Well, what I call the Earthshift is periodically, there are different periods in history. There are 1,000-year periods, there are even 20-year periods, which are not really Earth shifts per se, but they really help you track what's happening. But every 1,000 years, more or less, we do experience a certain massive Earth shift of consciousness, which also manifests in 3D, in a physical level. We see it tangibly in how the world becomes around us, how it changes around us, the way of life, how people do business, how people associate with each other, what countries do what, and how all this is, how the whole system flows. When I talk about a shift that happened 1,000 years ago, I primarily talk about the fact that I'm going to drop a bomb now, that for many years before that, what we call Russia currently and what we perceive as Russia, it had a different name at the time. It actually had several different names. Oftentimes it was called Rus, actually. And there were different kind of states with different lifestyle, but it was actually much larger. And then it included part of, according to some researchers, part of what is today Canada and US, and part of Latin America as well. It also included, if not all, at least parts of what is now Central and Western Europe. And we are here going into some territories that are very esoteric, that you cannot learn from history books anywhere that are available, and that are primarily available in a cutting edge theories with proofs, not just theories. They do have their proofs, and they do have certain things that they show that see how that's how it was. So it's not just entirely theoretical, but from Russian scientists. Some I agree with, some I disagree with. So I actually put together my own system. So what happened 1,000 years ago? The shift towards the West started. Before that, the what was dominant was the East. The East was where Russia is the great balancer. Everything was leaning towards the East, towards the Yin cultures. And at that time, China, India, and parts of the Middle East where the civilization flourished. We all know from history how wealthy and how advanced Chinese civilization was for, say, 2,000-3,000 maybe years prior to that. And Indian civilization. Then we know about the Middle East. So it was Persia in medieval times. Again, we mentioned Silk Roads. This is where all the wealth was. And then we cannot say, 1,000 years ago on the dot it just switched. These changes happen. Sometimes it takes 200-300 years for a change over to materialize. Sometimes it happens, takes much longer. And it also works like a wave. It's like a curve. You know, like probably you've seen those Wall Street waves, like curves. Yeah, there is a theory of long cycles by Kondrashov that shows how the market works in waves. So it's a wave. It starts on the low point and it starts growing. Then it reaches its pinnacle at some point and it starts going down, like this, like a wave. Just imagine any wave, right? Then again, it's at the low point. Then again, a new wave starts up, then pinnacle, then down. That's how the stock market works. That's how human civilization works in general. And so about 1,000 years ago, that's basically figuratively speaking, what happened was that Russia had to start rebalancing towards the Yang cultures. And the reason all these big waves happen for humanity, in humanity's development, is because in our development of consciousnness, we have to try everything. So we tried the Yin way when it was introverted, when Buddhism appeared and was spread out, when there was a caste system that was at first provided stability for India. For those who understand what the caste system is, it started with stability. That was the idea for the caste system, that everybody knows their place and it's very organized, but it ended up being stifling, being so Yin when nobody objected to being an outcast by society or being a Brahmin of society. Yeah, sure. Why would Brahmin object to being at the top of the food chain? But untouchables might have objected. And so that system did not allow you to break through the glass ceiling. And that Yin way of conducting affairs of society eventually started getting too stifling and weakened the country. And then the process of rebalancing towards the West starts. When basically a Western way, which is Yang way, which is aggressive, assertive, how it started 1,000 years ago. It started with the Catholic Church being extremely aggressive. And everybody heard from history about crusades. Crusades are associated with that aggressive push towards the East when crusaders from Western Europe, under the guise of regaining the control of the sacred sepulchre, which was only a guise, which the main reason for that was to dislodge the wealthy territories of Constantinople, which was the center of Christianity, the original one, that not only rivaled, basically Vatican wanted that power that Constantinople with Orthodox religion, where the seat of the Orthodox religion had. And they managed to do that. And Constantinople, which was extremely rich, extremely corrupt, extremely spoiled, they didn't have the proper army. Everybody was, compare Constantinople at the time to Saudi Arabia today. Very rich, lots of princes. Everybody thinks they're a prince, and they really don't want to fight. Everybody laughs while they have this modern equipment in the Saudi army because they can afford it. Their pilots don't even want to fly. They don't want to serve. They actually, because they're princes, why would they? And Constantinople fell. And then other areas where all these crusaders were advancing on, basically whatever rich cities were in their wake, they would just take all the riches, they would loot them. And that's how Western Europe started acquiring their wealth, because it was very, very poor before that in Western Europe. There was no trade, no crafts, and no people who manufactured things in Western Europe. So the further, with this initial wealth, what Western Europe started doing, they started building fleets. Then those fleets started traveling to further reaches of the universe. And we know, again, this is a multi-year, multi-century kind of process. The thing is that Russia, serving as this great balancer, then eventually tipped the scale towards the West. After they went to conquistadores from Spain and Portugal, and after England, etc., they went to the Americas and started taking over those territories. After all that started happening, the West became pretty wealthy. And at that point, Peter the Great, who is called Peter the Great, Peter I, the Emperor of Russia, he comes in and he decides that everything that is in the West is awesome, is great, and that Russia is too Eastern in its inclinations, too reflective, too introspective, living too much with nature, with the universe. People are wearing beards too much. He hated beards, started cutting off personally beards of his boyars and nobles in the country. He goes to the West. He goes to Holland and to England and decides that he wants everything like they have in the West. That was 300 years ago and counting. And this started that when, just if you imagine this, the balancer, the balance started tilting more and more towards the West. Okay. And now Russia is rebalancing it back to the East. But this time, it's not going to be, again, tilted too much to the East. The idea, the goal, this mega goal that the only way for the human civilization to actually survive and thrive in the new era is for Russia to succeed rebalancing the world evenly. So it's not yin or yang like it used to be in history, but that is yin yang and it's balanced. Therefore, I talk about, you said, well, what is the real new system? The real new system is cooperative society, which incorporates the best features of capitalism and the best features of socialism or communism. And again, forget definitions of both, because those are geopolitical definitions given by, and my Western readers and my Western listeners, they might even have a problem with what I just said. They're like, what do you mean communism or socialism? Because all they associate with communism and socialism, what they heard from Western sources that was bashing them. But I can assure you what you hear in the West, in MSM, in Western history books about communism, socialism, and capitalism, incidentally, is not what those systems are. Okay?
Mm-hmm. Okay, well, I think that people can just look at some of your Earthshift reports and your blog and get an idea for this. I think we'll try to get back to Eurasia for a little bit before we wrap up the interview.
Okay, I think that we already said plenty.
Well, we've said a lot, but are you optimistic? Do you think that the development of Eurasia will go fairly, I don't know if you want to say smoothly, but do you see things going in a positive way, and there won't be, I guess what you would say, huge wars or what have you? Economic collapse or something like that. You think things can move in a positive direction?
It's an excellent question, and I have an answer that has to be. It's a very complex answer, so people have to pay attention to what I'm saying, because it's not like yes or no. To the question of whether I see the result, not the process, but the result of what is happening now in Eurasia as a positive thing, absolutely yes. Absolutely and totally yes. This is going to be tremendous. This is going to be huge, but it will take years to accomplish. We are only in the beginning of this process. I'm talking 20, 30-year horizon for the new system to actually take hold. And what you said about Thailand, say about 10 years, maybe even in 5 years, and then in 10, 15 years, you will see definite changes there. And the country will work differently with neighbors, and everything will change. Okay, but not right now. What you said about Thailand, that the U.S. is unhappy with them, they're clashing, this will be happening everywhere. For as long as U.S. can do that. U.S. and other forces. U.S. is not exclusive, of course, but everybody has to understand, for the what we call NWO and what we call the West, U.S. is the brawn and the brain as well right now. And it's financial muscle, military muscle of the West, and most, intelligence, CIA, obviously the strongest intelligence service in the West. MI6 maybe, but MI6 is smaller than CIA. CIA is bigger. All that is concentrated in the U.S., as well as pretty aggressive stance towards the rest of the world in the U.S. Congress, amongst parts of U.S. public, but especially U.S. politicians. All that is concentrated on the U.S. more so than anywhere else. So anybody who has a problem with me saying it's U.S., yeah, there are other forces in the world. Some of them are hidden, but this is what we see. This is a pretty big tip of the iceberg, and then some. That's the U.S. So I do not see a smooth road ahead for Eurasian development. It will be on and off. It will be starts and stops. And it will be done cautiously. Knowing the leadership of both China and Russia, they are very level-headed. They're very careful. They're very smart people. And in China as well. China has a set of its own very grave problems, including some people start talking about the possibility of so-called perestroika and Gorbachev kind of situation in China in 5-7 years. And we know how perestroika ended in the Soviet Union with the breakup of the Soviet Union, which is now starting to pull together, actually, naturally, those parts of it that are naturally drawn to each other, they start pulling together, and will be more and more of that happening in the future. So I see a very good prospects for Eurasian Union, excellent prospects. I see excellent prospects for SCO. Everybody wants to join SCO. It's just that there are very strict requirements for everybody. It isn't like like European Union was made put together, slapped together, I should say, with the countries that have very strong economy, countries that are very well managed, such as Germany or Holland, for example, or Denmark. You join with them, Greece and Spain and Italy, where economy was oftentimes mismanaged, sometimes very dramatically. Then you add to them, slap together all these former Soviet bloc countries, such as Romania, with non-existent economy, or Bulgaria, where economy is agricultural based, and they destroyed that agriculture in the process, trying to accommodate the EU requirements and all that. And I'm not even talking about the countries like Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia, part of the Baltics bloc. And those, they're empty. More than one half of the population works abroad. They don't even want to go back to their country. All they wanted from joining the EU was the possibility of actually getting the visa-free travel around the EU, so they could leave their own country. That's all they wanted, and all that was done. They were accepted so quickly, all these countries, into the EU without proper oversight, was because specifically they wanted to tear all those countries away from any possibility of the Russian influence, what they're trying to do to Ukraine today, or to Moldova, for that matter. So this is not how SCO approaches this, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. They have very strict requirements. And so for, say, India to join, they have to jump through a lot of hoops. Same with Iran and other countries who all want to join that organization. So the developments will be very good, but I have a slight caution about what will be happening with China, because however you look at it, China is the main economic power of the world, and therefore of the entire Eurasia and of all these organizations. So China has to stay in a very good economic shape for the foreseeable future in order to continue going in the right direction. And Russia is the main geopolitical power of this whole space, and only Russia can talk with the U.S., not economically and equals, but militarily and geopolitically as equals. That's the only country. Even China cannot do that to the extent that Russia can. So Russia and China have to stick together, and they will. That's a confident prediction. And Eurasian space will be developing steadily away from the dollar towards regional currencies. And another interesting thing is that Russia is not that concerned about where ruble is, for a very good reason, because they will be developing, they already are developing a new currency, which will be Eurasian currency. That's another prediction that I have. I wrote about it, and I have a video about that on my YouTube channel, and the article, anybody is interested, there is a lot of interesting information there. So these are my predictions. So there will be problems along the way, and it has to be expected, but the results will be great.
Well, that's good. I'm sure a lot of our listeners are in the U.S. What do you see? Will the U.S. What can I say? Have its own reforms? Will it? Will the U.S. get its own Putin?
Oh boy, yeah, no.
No Putin.
I'm sorry.
No Putin for us.
Well, it's a complicated situation. I do not see. Unfortunately, sorry, I cannot give like a stellar prediction with raving, a wonderful, shiny prediction for my U.S. listeners, readers, and such. And the majority of my readers and listeners are also from the U.S. or from Canada. Canada also have a lot of those, and then UK goes next, and all the English-speaking world, in fact. What can I tell you? It's going to be a long and tedious road. That's number one. Number two, U.S. has been, I have to give them that. They've been they're very talented in pushing that can down the road. So they've been doing that extremely well. The can is being pushed and pushed and pushed down the road, but you cannot postpone that reckoning forever. It eventually kind of, chickens do come to roost, whether you want it or not. And as the world, see what is happening. This is very important for everybody to understand. This is one of the most important things I'm saying in this interview. Is this that the rest of the world cannot afford to pull the plug on the petrodollar and petrodollar dominance right now. A lot of people have been predicting, oh, China or Russia can crush dollar at any moment, and they're going to do that. I keep seeing that in the alternative media. For some reason, this is such a great headline to have, because probably it gives you a lot of readership and people flock to something like this. But I will tell you the truth. Okay, I'm not going to go after headlines or sensationalism. I'm going to tell you the truth. And the truth is this: the world at large cannot stand another huge crisis. People have been through lots of wars, world wars. There was economies were completely devastated. So nobody, neither China, that has been through the whole 20th century of turmoils, nor Russia, which has been through as many turmoils in the 20th century and beginning of this century, neither European Union, after 2 devastating world wars, will pull that plug. They will be working incrementally, very slowly, and that includes South America, that also went through the whole 20th century of terrible turmoils and dictatorships and revolutions throughout the entire 20th century. See, US is the only country that hasn't had a meaningful revolution except the very first one, and any wars except the Civil War in the 19th century. It's the only country that has never been invaded except those 2 occasions, and never was a direct participant, and I mean direct participant, not this sideshow during World War I and World War II. Is the only country that hasn't known devastation and destruction like other countries did. So other countries, their position is, we're going to be doing it as slowly as possible, as quietly as possible, transitioning to the new system. That's why it's going to be very slow. So it gives US buys some time. I also do have some predictions, and we'll have more about the timeline when US will start experiencing problems. And actually, we did discuss it in our other interviews as well a little bit. So I'm not going to go into that. But US has bought a little bit more time. But eventually it will start kind of like skyrocketing, kind of snowballing. And once the snowball effect starts, you know what happens, avalanche eventually. And when avalanche happens, we may have revolutions in the US. There might be secession movements that are actually quite successful. And this is 50-50 right now.
I'm pushing for New York City to secede.
For New York City, that
no,
I don't think this will happen. Actually,
I want Wall Street to secede.
To secede from the rest of the country, right?
To secede, then we'll have a fighting chance.
Well,
I tell you what, Lada, why don't we wrap it up here? But before we close, if you want to tell listeners your website and how they can get some of your Earthshift reports or your novels, that would be good.
Okay, I could do that. The main blog is futuristtrendcast.wordpress.com. That's where all my articles are, and I announce everything there, whatever else is happening, including interviews. Our interview I will announce on my blog, etc., etc. My YouTube channel is Lada Ray. Simply Lada Ray. Just type it in on YouTube and you will pull it up. And I have a lot of interesting episodes there, both on the Earthshift theory, and more are coming soon. My geopolitical analysis, predictions, and Lada Ray Live is the show that deals with the geopolitical side of the world. And ladaray.info. This is my new website, which will be a home to the Earthshift report. And Earthshift reports that are coming up within the next week to 2-3 weeks are the following. The first one is it will be dealing with, the name is Ukraine. new Khazarian Khaganate and question mark, whether Ukraine will be turning into a new Khazarian Khaganate. That will be a super interesting report. Of course, the second one is about the oligarch wars in Ukraine and what to expect from that and who is really pulling the strings. Then the next one will actually be Game of Rubles, like Game of Thrones, basically. Game of Rubles, in which I will discuss in depth a lot of the things that I touched upon today and more. And also the Putin enigma is coming. Then I will be discussing the alien technology in one of the future reports that is a part of, how Russian military actually, what kind of alien technology and 5, 6, and 7D technology that Russian army actually possesses. I have amazing information. Actually, I have a documentary about that, full documentary, which I will translate into English just for my readers of the Earthshift report. And at this point, we decided, we had a lot of discussions, we decided not to make Earthshift report a subscription-based report. At least for the time being, we are trying it as a donation-based. So people actually donate any amount, and I understand different people have different financial capability. So some might donate more, others less. And I'm giving people that opportunity to donate whatever they can. And once you donate it, you read that report. Some people who donated previously to my efforts, and there are some nice people who donated over $50, over $100, $200, and those who have a subscription donation, I will give them 1 or 2 reports for free, but others will be donation based. So that's my story.
Okay, well, that sounds good, and it certainly sounds most interesting. So people can check out your website and your YouTube channel, and then they can investigate this. And I can say, by the way, that I read 1 or 2 of your novels, and I enjoyed them quite a bit. I think you're a good writer, so I recommend them as well.
Thank you very much. Yes, I didn't mention that, but on Futurist Trendcast and ladaray.info, you can find links to my novels as well. And incidentally, I wanted to point out that I will be happy to send you and Melody and anybody who is interested in your team copies of my Earthshift reports when they come out. So either I can email them to you and Melody, and you distribute them to to everybody who is interested, or however you want to do it. But as complimentary.
Well, we appreciate the offer. We appreciate that.
If you are interested, let me know.
Yes,
well,
I
we
think
definitely
it would be really fun.
Yeah, and there will be more things that Melody is interested in, like the Putin enigma. I think it's right up Melody's alley, actually. When that
good. Well, why don't we call it a wrap now? And we just thank you so much for coming, and that's it. Most interesting. So, thanks again, Lada.
You're very welcome. It was fun. Thank you very much.
And Melody, thanks for coming.
You're welcome. I had a great time.
Okay, that's it, folks. Till next time. It's a wrap. Bye.